Good evening. My name is Joseph Sippets. I'm here for the St. Joseph County Public Library, and it's time for yet another Saturday night story. And I am recording this ahead of the July 4th holiday, and I thought, as such, I should probably read an American story from an American author. And there's no one author that you think of as being the American author than Mark Twain. And so I have chosen one of his books or one of his stories, and it is in fact called A Ghost Story. So let us begin. I took a large room far up Broadway in a huge old building whose upper stories had been wholly unoccupied for years until I came. The place had been long given up to dust and cobwebs, to solitude and silence. I seemed groping among the tombs and invading the privacy of the dead, and that night I climbed up to my quarters. For the first time in my life, a superstitious dread came upon me, and I turned a dark angle of the stairway, and an invisible cobweb swung its lazy way woof in my face and clung there, and I shuddered as one who had been encountered a phantom. I was glad enough when I reached my room and locked out the mold and darkness. A cheery fire was burning in the grate, and I sat down before a comforting sense of relief. And for 2 hours I sat there, thinking of bygone times, recalling old scenes, and summoning half-forgotten faces out of the mists of the past, listening to fancy, to voices that long ago grew silent for all time, and to once familiar songs that nobody sings now. And as my reverie softened down to a sadder and sadder pathos, the shrieking of the winds outside softened to a wail. The angry beating of the rain against the panes diminished to a tranquil patter, and one by one the noises on the street subsided until the hurrying footprints of the last belated stranger died away in the distance and left no sound behind. The fire had burned low. A sense of loneliness crept over me. I arose and undressed, moving on tiptoe around the room, doing stealthily what I had to do, as if I were environed by a sleeping enemy whose slumbers it would be fatal to break. I covered up in bed and lay listening to the rain and the wind and the faint creaking of the distant shutters till they lulled me into sleep. I slept profoundly, but how long I do not know. All at once I found myself awake, and filled with a shuddering expectancy. All was still, all but my own heart, and I could hear it beat. Presently the bedclothes began to slip away slowly toward the foot of the bed, as if someone were pulling them. I could not stir. I could not speak. Still the blankets slipped deliberately away until my breast was uncovered. Then, with great effort, I seized them and drew them over my head. I waited, listened, waited. Once more the steady pull began, and once more I lay torpid in a century of dragging seconds till snatched the covers, until my breast was naked again. At last I roused my energies and snatched the covers back to their place and held them with a strong grip. I waited. By and by I felt a faint tug, and took a fresh grip. The tug strengthened into a steady strain. It grew stronger and stronger. My hold parted, and for the third time the blanket slid away. I groaned. An answering groan came from the foot of the bed. Beaded drops of sweat upon my forehead. I was more dead than alive. Presently I heard a heavy footstep in my room. The step of an elephant, it seemed to me. It was not like anything human, but it was moving from me. There was a relief in that. I heard it approach the door, pass out without moving bolt or lock, and wander away among the dismal corridors, straining the floors and joists until they creaked again as it passed, and then silence reigned once more. When my excitement had calmed, I said to myself, "This is a dream, simply a hideous dream." And so I lay thinking it over and convinced myself that it was a dream. And then a comforting laugh relaxed my lips, and I was happy again. I got up, I struck a light, and when I found the locks and bolts were just as I had left them, another soothing laugh welled in my heart and rippled from my lips. I took my pipe and lit it, and it was just sitting down before the fire when down went the pipe out of my nerveless fingers. The blood forsook my cheeks, and my placid breathing was cut short with a gasp. In the ashes of the hearth, side by side with my own bare footprint, was another, so vast that in comparison mine was but an infant's. Then I had a visitor, and the elephant tread was explained. I put out the light and returned to bed, palsied with fear. I lay a long time peering into the darkness and listening. Then I heard a grating noise overhead, like the dragging of a heavy body across the floor, then the throwing down of the body, and then the shaking of my windows in response to the concussion. In distant parts of the building, I heard a muffled slamming of doors. I heard, at intervals, stealthy footprints creeping in and out of the corridors and up and down the stairs. Sometimes these noises approached my door, hesitated, and went away again. I heard the clanking of the chains faintly in remote passages. I listened while the clanking grew nearer, while it wearily climbed the stairways, marking each move by a loose surplus of chain that fell with an accented rattle upon each succeeding step as a goblin has bore it advanced. I heard muttered sentences, half uttered screams that seemed smothered violently, and a swish of invisible garments, the rush of invisible wings, and then I became conscious that my chamber was invaded, that I was not alone. I heard sighs and breaths around my bed and mysterious whisperings. Three little spheres of soft phosphorescence light appeared on the ceiling directly above my head and clung and glowed there for a moment and then dropped, two of them upon my face and one upon the pillow. They sputtered liquidly and felt warm. Intuition told me they had turned to gouts of blood as they fell. I needed no light to satisfy myself of that. Then I saw pallid faces, dimly luminous, and white, uplifted hands floating bodiless in the air, floating a moment and then disappearing. The whispering ceased, and the voices and the sounds and the solemn stillness followed. I waited and listened. I felt that I must have light or die. I was weak with fear. I felt that I must. I slowly raised myself toward a sitting posture, and my face came into contact with a clammy hand. All strength went from me, apparently, and I fell back like a stricken invalid. Then I heard the rustle of a garment. It seemed to pass out the door to go out. When everything was still once more, I crept out of bed, sick and feeble, and lit the gas with a hand that trembled as if it were aged with 100 years. The light brought some little cheer to my spirits. I sat down and fell into a dreamy contemplation of that great footprint in the ashes. By and by, the outlines began to waver and grow dim. I glanced up, and broad gas flame was slowly wilting away. In the same moment, I heard the elephant tread again. I noticed that the approach, nearer and nearer, was along the musty walls, and dimmer the light waned. The tread reached my very door and paused. The light had dwindled to a sickly blue, and all the things around me lay in a spectral twilight. The door did not open, and yet I felt a faint gust of air fan my cheek, and presently was conscious of a huge, cloudy presence before me. I watched it with fascinating eyes. A pale glow stole over the thing. Gradually, its cloudy folds took shape. An arm appeared, then legs, then a body, and at last a sad, great face looked out of the vapor, stripped of its flimsy housings, naked, muscular, and comely. The majestic Cardiff giant loomed above me. All of my misery vanished, for a child might know that no harm can come with that benign countenance. My cheerful spirits returned once more, and in sympathy with them, the gas flame went brightly up again. Never a lonely outcast was so glad to welcome company as I met the friendly giant. I said, "Why, Is it nobody but you? Do you know I have been scared to death, and for the last 2 or 3 hours I am the most honestly glad to see you. I wish I had a chair. Here, here. Do not try to sit down on that thing. But it was too late. He was in it before I could stop him, and down he went. I never saw a chair shivered so in my life. Stop, stop, you'll ruin it. Too late again. There was another crash, and another chair was resolved into its original elements. Confound it. You haven't got any judgment at all. Do you want to ruin all the furniture in this place? Here, here, you petrified fool. But it was no use. Before I could arrest him, he sat down on the bed, and it was melancholy ruin. Now, what sort of a way is that to do? First, you come lumbering around the place, bringing a legion of vagabond goblins along with you to worry me to death, and then I overlook an indelicacy of costume which would not be tolerated anywhere by cultivated people except in a respectable theater, and not even if there was the nudity were of your sex. You repay me by wrecking all my furniture you can find that you sit on. And why will you? You damage yourself as much as you do me, and you have broken off the end of your spinal column and littered up the floor and chips of your hams until the place looks like a marble yard. You ought to know to be ashamed of yourself. You are big enough to know better. Well, I will not break any more furniture, but what am I to do? I have not had chance to sit down for a century. And the tears came into his eyes. Poor devil, I said, I should have not been so harsh with you. And you are an orphan too, no doubt. But sit down on the floor there. Nothing else can stand your weight. And besides, we cannot be sociable with you way up there above me. I want you down here where I can perch on this high counting house stool and gossip with you face to face. So he sat down on the floor and lit a pipe, which I gave him, threw one of my red blankets over his shoulders, inverted my sitz bath on his head, helmet fashion, and made himself picturesque and comfortable. Then he crossed his ankles while I renewed the fire and exposed the flat, honeycombed bottoms of his prodigious feet to the grateful warmth. What is the matter with the bottom of your feet and the back of your legs, that they are gouged up so? Infernal chilblains, I caught them clear up to the back of my head, roosting out there under Newell's farm. But I love the place. I love it as the one loves his old home, and there is no place for me like the peace I feel when I am there. We talked for about a half an hour, and then I noticed that he was looking tired and spoke of it. Tired, he said. Well, I should think so, and now I will tell you about it, since you have treated me so well. I am the spirit of the petrified man that lies across the street there in the museum. I am the ghost of the Cardiff giant. I can have no rest, no peace, till they had given that poor body burial again. Now, what was the most natural thing for me to do to make men satisfy this wish? Terrify them into it, haunt the place where my body lay. So I haunted the museum night after night. I even got other spirits to help me. But it did no good, and nobody ever came to the museum at midnight. Then it occurred to me to come over this way, and haunt this place a little. I felt that if I ever got a hearing, I must succeed. For I had the most efficient company that perdition could furnish. Night after night, we have shivered around through the tumbleweeded halls, dragging chains, groaning, whispering, tramping up and down stairs, till, to tell you the truth, I am almost worn out. But then I saw your light in your room tonight, and I roused my energies again and went at it with a deal of old freshness. But I am tired out, entirely out. Give me, I beseech you, give me some hope. I lit off my perch in a burst of excitement and exclaimed, this transcends everything. Everything you had ever did occur. Why, you poor blundering old fossil, you have had all your trouble cost for nothing. You have been haunting a plaster cast of yourself. The real Cardiff giant is in Albany. Confound it, don't you even know your own remains? I never saw such an eloquent look of shame, a pitiable humiliation overspread a countenance before. The petrified man rose slowly to his feet and said, "Honestly, is this true?" "As true as I'm sitting here." He took the pipe from his mouth and laid it on the mantel, then stood irresolute a moment, unconsciously from old habit, thrusting his hands where his pantaloon pockets should have been, and meditatively dropping the chain on his breast. And he finally said, "Well, I never felt so absurd before. The petrified man had sold everybody else, and now the mean fraud has ended by selling his own ghost. My son, if there is any charity left in your heart for the poor, friendless phantom like me, don't let this get out. Think of how you would feel if you had made such an ass of yourself." I heard his stately tramp die away, step by step down the stairs and out into the deserted street, and felt sorry that he was gone, poor fellow, and sorrier still that he had carried off my red blanket and my bathtub. End of story. Good night.